One thing I'll mention that was really cool when I visited Chair was holding the Infinity Blade.
Greetings, mortals, and welcome to the Pantheon Archives, an Infinity Blade podcast. What you heard there at the beginning is just a taste of what's coming in this first episode of our show, a show which I hope will be home to many conversations with a pantheon of people related to Infinity Blade, from developers to community members, and to whoever else we can get on here. But with that said, let's kick things off with our inaugural episode. And for this special occasion, that meant reaching out to an old friend, Infinity Blade superfan, someone who needs no introduction really for the community at large, Mr. Grant Noe. Grant?
Thank you so much for having me on. It's really quite an honor, and I love being in touch with the old crew and the community whenever I can. And so it's just such a pleasure to be able to be here with you today, talking about something I think we both love, near and dear to the heart. Introductory-wise, I don't really know what to say. I guess I started with the community around the IB 1 time, and really have been with it ever since through IB 3, and was active on the forums during that period of time. And, it underwent a transition at some point over to different platforms, and I gotta say, life's been busy, but never lost the love for it.
Yeah, no, we're glad to have you back in touch with the community here. I don't know if many folks know much about your early history with the community. Most probably know you as this figure, this name, Mr. Noe, namesake of No Mercy. So could you tell us a little bit about how you found Infinity Blade, or whether you were introduced or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to remember way back then, I was really into the Apple conferences. And so there's probably one of two ways that I came across it. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was just kind of on the app screen splash page at one point in time. And that's how I came across it. But it's equally possible that I found it through one of those Apple, WWDC or something like that, when they showcase the new tech. But I think it was just on the App Store one day. And, you see those big images on there of some new application that's come out, some new game. And at that point in time, as far as games go, there wasn't a whole lot that was very impressive. There was you'd get those hunting games where you see this beautiful imagery. It looked like you're about to hunt a deer or something like that. And you can swipe back and forth with whatever weapon you're hunting with. And it looks beautiful in the App Store when you're looking at the screenshots. But as far as the function goes, it's not all that impressive. So I remember seeing the images of Infinity Blade and thinking, there's no way this game actually plays as beautifully as it looks. And so, of course, I spent the money, downloaded it, and my goodness, it was just lived up to the expectation and then some, as you dug more into the storyline and so forth. So that's, I think, kind of how I got started with it.
Yeah, I look back on those days and kind of envious of how awesome that must have been, like the transition from mostly 2D graphics on mobile to Unreal Engine. And here's not only 3D graphics, but with God rays in IB2, but 3D graphics with shading and textures and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was really something that's quite impressive. And however old I was at the time, probably sometime in high school, was pretty mind blowing and really quite a pleasure. There was nothing like it on mobile, and if I had to argue it, I'd say there's really nothing that still holds a candle to it, but one man's opinion.
I know, I'd agree. I know that many of the folks in the community Discord and the community at large would definitely agree. Speaking of the community, I know I didn't get a chance to get involved with the community in my early years with the games, but how did you get involved with the forums, Infinity Blade Masters, and the community? Because I feel like that's where you really start to get your name out there and get more involved with the community.
It's funny. So when I finished Infinity Blade 1, I had all these theories about what everything meant. And, being the young person I was, I thought, I must be the only person with these ideas, And so, of course, you find the one community where all those ideas exist and where people care to talk about them. And so I found the forum in pretty early days, and I went on what you could call a bit of a rampage. And it's, if anybody listening has ever been part of a forum, you full well know when a first-time poster comes around, their favorite thing to do is everything needs to be its own thread. And so you'll drop like 10 threads in there with different subjects, and it annoys all the regulars. So that's exactly what I did. Day one, I was like, hey, I've got all these interesting ideas, or so I thought. And so I created a bunch of threads for them and then had people tell me, hey, there's a nice way to do this, and this isn't it. But I remember early on, one of the people there, Groove Holmes, if anyone's familiar with him, he was always really great and extremely into the theories, and everything I'd thought about, he had already thought about. And so he was great at kind of introducing me to the forum and proper decorum there, and sort of getting me up to speed on what the current thought was as far as Infinity Blade lore went. And so that was kind of my introduction to it, as I just wanted some place to talk about the storyline. Because to be honest, of all the great things about Infinity Blade, graphics, gameplay, the storyline is right up there. And so that was a really great outlet for me. And, from there, it just kind of transitioned into getting to know the regular community members there, really appreciating them and what they brought to the table, going personally more from being interested into the story to also interested in performing well in the game. And it kind of went from there.
I know I can confirm that that initial barrage of threads is in fact real. I have seen it. I've dived into the Wayback Machine on the Epic Games forum, and I have in fact seen those threads.
Yeah.
So from humble beginnings in the forums to eventually be being named among the so-called Infinity Blade Masters, what kind of led to that rise? How did you get to know the folks in the Masters, and what was that experience like being a part of that exclusive club and YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I guess part of that was just sort of getting to know the people in the forum, and it's interesting how that transition took place. It was maybe less formal than what some might think. We really started becoming friends, if you could say, and posting quite frequently on there on each other's threads and getting to know each other. And it became apparent pretty early on that the forum wasn't the best place for us to have casual discourse. Discord is a great place for that, of course, and so it's like the perfect medium for that type of thing. But back at that time, it's like each thread had to stick very closely to its topic. And so we decided, some of us, to branch off onto this app called Kick, and then we went over to GroupMe and back and forth. And it was just a small group of us that wanted to stay closer in touch and have, irrelevant conversations about life. And among that group were some of the later IB Masters, and I think it was just part of the dialogue there that iDroid came to us one day and said, hey, we should start a channel for this. I think it'd be a hit. And he was sort of our resident YouTube expert at that point in time, because he had amassed quite a following, if my memory serves me. And so we thought about it and kind of laid out a little plan and said, hey, let's do it. So we kicked it off, and basically each of us sort of had our own role. And so this was a little bit before I had developed what you might say is like a classical skill in the game. I was still just sort of the IB1, IB2 lore guy. And so I didn't venture so much into gameplay tactics and strategy at that point in time. I don't even think I was working towards the Pantheon at that point in time. And so I just was focusing on doing like entertainment videos and that kind of thing. And while the others would focus more on like gameplay strategy and tips. And so I did a few videos that sort of filled that niche, and they were really fun, if not a little bit risky to film, but it was a good time.
Yeah, I look back on those early Infinity Blade community videos, not just the Masters, but they've got a lot of charm to them. It's nostalgia. Different era of YouTube back then, for sure.
Yes. Yes, we were all still trying to figure it out, I think. Not sure if we did.
For such a community in its infancy, I know that the guidance of those in the Masters and other mainstays of the community were extremely helpful to those like myself who were getting into Infinity Blade anew, but and not just the Infinity Blade, but I guess mobile gaming as a whole.
Yeah, Tamil was a really big standout on that front. She really came into her own and ultimately surpassed all of us. She was amazing when it came to the quality of her videos and her tips and editing. And so really big kudos to her for all of that. She was spectacular. And I can't imagine the number of people in the community that she still helps to this day for the people that are sideloading and playing and trying to improve.
No doubt. I know that I'm at least quick to link to a Tamil video that is topical to whatever is being discussed in Discord. So no doubt about that. Although you, of course, contributed to that. I recall you being contributor for the important threads thread.
Oh,
Was
yeah.
that yeah? What do you recall about that?
The useful threads list, the UTL. That was kind of my first big thread, so to speak. And it was kind of silly, really. All it was a compilation of other people's good threads. And the problem was, again, kind of a bit of a forum thing, you could say, is good threads would get buried. And once a lot of discourse had taken place on a lot of different threads, good threads would get very, very buried. And so all it was just kind of like a table of contents of all the things that we cared about the most and wanted quick and easy access to. And so, just a compendium of sorts, and people would submit different threads to me when they thought it should be included, and I would put it in there. So it was just kind of a clerical task, and it was really helpful. So, it was a good thing.
I know I recall always seeing that pinned at the top of the forum alongside the Aegis Tourney thread and all that. So it was nice to have those all compiled right there, because I jumped in relatively late in the process. And so when I was joining clubs, trying to build up my forum signature, as those were a thing, I recall like getting into, I think it was the Milk Club, and just those ones that had been dormant for so long, and I unintentionally bumping those, which I was not aware of that terminology or much of the forum terminology at all. But that was an interesting trial by fire.
Yes, indeed. It's a good reminder. Thank you. I had forgotten about that a little bit. So
yeah, the Milk Club, God King Club. I've got a whole list of threads I've archived, but lots of charm in those.
Oh yeah.
But of course, the forums they're not always as active as they are at any given point. They have like periods of dormancy, and there are periods of activity when new updates come out. So did it come as some shock that Infinity Blade 2 came out, that was announced? I don't know how the community was back then. Records aren't too clear, but what do you recall about that? I guess that lull in between Infinity Blade 1 and the announcement for 2.
Yeah. I don't recall what the time period, the gap period was too much between those two things, but I remember just universal forum excitement when Infinity Blade 2 was announced. And I can't say as though any of us were necessarily anticipating it. It just kind of, came as a bit of a shock when it was announced on stage at the Apple conference. And everybody was just so pumped up about the opportunity for different weapons classes. And you could see the preview of different enemy types. The graphics looked like such a big bump up. I can't remember the term, but you referenced it earlier, where they show like the light rays coming through at Sadie's palace when the door opens.
The God rays.
God rays, yes. It was just everything end to end looked so incredible when that game was announced. And it's interesting though. On my first playthrough of Infinity Blade 2, I thought it was like, instead of continuing the story, for some reason, maybe I was just like fast forwarding through the intros or something at that point in time, but I thought it was a remake of the first game instead of a sequel. And so I went through the whole tower, got up to Thane, beat him, and I thought, man, this is like way easier. They nerfed the first game. They nerfed the God King, That's kind of what I had in my mind. But then, of course, you branch off in the later Bloodlines and or I guess at that point, Rebirths, and sort of discover, everything else that there is to that game. So, but that was a really exciting time, and I feel like the forum blossomed a whole lot more than it was with just Infinity Blade 1. Infinity Blade 1 was always Chair's test environment, so to speak, to see what could happen on an iPhone. And IB2 really felt like they were flexing their creativity and their skills. And so the community really jumped up in popularity and in the quantity of participants at that point in time. And it was really exciting and invigorating for us who had been there before that game was launched, to have this whole new wave of people come through, be interested in the storyline, just like I was with Infinity Blade 1 when I started, see people take a renewed interest in like high quality gameplay, all those things. And so it was great to get those new people onboarded and just add to the community. Very special time.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's when a lot of the clubs came into the picture with all those new ways of playing the game, allowing people to fill out those niches between the classes, builds, all the gems, the potions, just, yeah, so much that exploded with Infinity Blade 2.
Yes.
On that note, I guess another thing that exploded there was, of course, the story. You not only had English voice acting coming into the picture with top tier talent for voice actors, but there was also the first book, Infinity Blade Awakening, that bridged the two. Did you read that?
Yes, I did. Yeah, that was super exciting. Man, as an early lore guy, that was one of those things that just really like reinvigorates the passion for something, because you come in with all these theories, and it's like for as many questions as were answered by the book, it introduced so many more new questions. And then there's also that wonder and awe at all the things that are left unexplored. Like when you're reading about the Pantheon in the first book, and you're just kind of wondering, you've only had experiences in gameplay going against Raviar. And so then you wonder what it's going to be like, or if you'll ever have the opportunity to face down some of those other characters. And so that was just really cool to kind of see the enemies and the possibilities expanded way further than they were at the end of the first game. So yes, that is something I was like super into, go through, take all your notes. Everybody did, went through, take all their notes, and then we post up our different opinions on it and battle it out on the forums to see who we thought was correct or incorrect. So it was a good time.
I know I'm due for a reread, take my notes and see what I've missed in the time that has elapsed since I last read, because I tell you, I don't know what it is about Sanderson or those books, but I go through, I read them, I take copious notes that I think are really, really nice and comprehensive, and then I come back to Control F through the book and try and answer some question that's on the subreddit or something, and I find just a little well of information that I think, I do not recall this being here. Where was this?
Well, you are the wealth of the knowledge called the Archivist, so I appreciate your modesty, but somehow I doubt that that's even true.
The example that comes to mind is how detailed Sanderson's description is for the foliage of Lantimore, yeah, and how it has bamboo and describing which side of the island it's on. And I gave that not a second thought when I was initially reading it, and coming back to try and answer some question about probably the world map, the state of the world at the time of the trilogy, and that was just a really interesting detail that he threw with it. I thought it was a nice piece of world building because it was rather informative about that sort of thing. It's weird.
Yeah, it gives you some idea of what the geography might be at the different locations, and he was very detailed in that sense. That it made it special, didn't it? In a certain way, kind of made it come alive, because you got to think that as a reader, there's not just fluff behind all the different theories you're putting forth and discussing with other people. You think there must actually be some answer to this. It's not just something where imagining is there. There's intentionality there.
Or at least, yeah, that's the hope. You mentioned, questions being answered, but even more being created. And I totally feel that these days, because even with 2 books, a number of podcasts, the number of AMAs out, I still feel like we have so many unanswered questions that may never be answered, unfortunately.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could read Pangean, but that project stalled, didn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think that Pangean was holding any secrets in the end, unfortunately.
Well, you and I were working on that, weren't we?
Yeah. I approached you on the forums before even the first hacking of the forums to say, hey, I noticed your old Pangean and lore threads. I was hoping to try and decipher this conlang.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like we had been told by someone at chair, I think it was Bradley,
Yeah.
that there was they were able to be translated, but it was never really clear whether or not it was all of it or just some of it. But it was really tough to find any consistent thread there to what was being used, the different symbols that were being used, and say, yeah, there's a clear pattern here.
Yeah, I recall getting your message that you had screenshotted from your conversation with Brad, mentioning that it was like a Caesarian cipher, just a really simple one-to-one replacement. I forget exactly what it was, but yeah, that was exciting.
Exciting, but never cracked, unfortunately.
Yeah, Infinity Blade 2 Pangean is too repetitive, and I think 3 ended up being much the same way. I don't know, it might be worth revisiting, but I mean, hey, it's a conlang when you're putting together a game in less than a year. You can only pay so much mind to the languages.
Absolutely.
So, of course, can't talk about Pangean without talking about Infinity Blade 3. Do you recall anything about the lead up to the third entry? There was a lull between those two. I know I've delved into the forums and seen that kind of awkward time period between the second and third entries, and it reminded me a lot of Star Wars, oddly enough, and how there was this lull in the community between like the prequels and the sequels, and just that odd dormant period of the community. Do you recall anything about that time?
I wish I could kind of put it on my own timeline to say what I was up to in that period. Do you recall the launch year of Infinity Blade 3?
2013, September.
2013? Okay. So, I mean, at that point in time, it was high school graduation for me. And so I think pretty much all the regulars on the forum from one time to the next would take little breaks, not permanent breaks, but where we were just checking in less frequently. And when you're so involved, you kind of feel like at times, number one, you need to step away because you don't want your passion project to become something that feels like work, and feeling like you have to show up so consistently to something at times for years, of course, can start to feel a little bit like work. And then, number two, when you've got these side communities, like when we're doing the Kick or Group Me or what have you, it just necessitated a little bit less time, I guess you could say, on the forum. So that time of my life, you're applying to college, and other people have their busy lives. I had my busy life, and so I would think that there was a bit of a lull there, probably for me and some others, just being a little bit less avid participants, because there wasn't really much new to go off of. Not much new lore to discuss, not much new gameplay to be had for those of us that even delved into the clubs, and so we waited. And when Infinity Blade 3 came about, I sensed there was a little bit less hype than there was for Infinity Blade 2, because it's kind of like we discussed before, there was a really big jump in technology from 1 to 2, and also in the intentionality and the work that was put into it by Chair. And that's not to minimize in any way the amount of work that went into Infinity Blade 3, because they really did expand everything. The gameplay, the graphics, the characters. There's so much packed into that game. But 1 to 2 somehow felt like a larger jump than 2 to 3. And so still a lot of hype around the game. Everyone very excited to see how the story would play out. I think there was some sense that this would probably be their last entry into the franchise. And so we really absorbed all the excitement around that and the time that we could spend with that game and diving into it as well.
Yeah, and I know that Chair kind of capitalized on that excitement, advertising. It was a pretty successful game, of course, but also kind of pushing with the community to try and engage with them more. Of course, the standout event in this time frame is the Infinity Blade Superfan contest. So, in spite of your busy life, you no doubt came back to the community and entered into this competition. So, what can you tell us about, learning about the competition and figuring out how you were going to enter? What was your thoughts about that?
So, I was pretty into Minecraft at that point in time, the creative mode, and so I would just build things for the fun of it. And I had started a project building out environments from Infinity Blade 1 and Infinity Blade 2 at that point in time, but I had progressed quite far with Infinity Blade 2. And this was just something that when I wanted to like decompress, I would just kind of hop on there and do a little bit of that, get back to studies, back and forth, that kind of thing. And so there was already quite a lot of work put into it by the time the Superfan contest was announced. And so when it was announced, I did spend some time I knew I wanted to enter, and I'd never really won like a major contest before. So I was like, well, probably snowball's chance that I'll actually succeed in this, but hey, you got to shoot your shot, right? And so I spent a little time considering what I wanted to do, and it kind of came down to two things for me because I submitted a little bit of an unconventional entry to that. Chair's request was that you submit a picture. And so when I submitted the picture, I submitted screenshots, like in this long, where I'd stitched together a bunch of photos. It was some screenshots of what I'd built in Minecraft, and I just went way further and pushed way harder to try to complete that a little bit more so that it looked better by the time the entry deadline came about. So I submitted those, and then I also submitted some information about my time at the forum and like my gameplay and level in Infinity Blade 2 and that kind of thing, because I think what they were really trying to see was, is this someone that really cares about the community? Is this someone that really cares about the game, etc.? And how can you best demonstrate that? And so between forum involvement, gameplay, where I clearly put in my hours, and what I had built in Minecraft, I think it was overall a good submission. I didn't think, I really didn't think I had a shot, to be honest. It was interesting around that time learning about everybody's submissions and how passionate they were about the game, and seeing what different people had created. It was a really, really special thing, and I just remember at that time feeling definitely unworthy of it, I knew I'd put in the time, but that didn't... Everyone had, in their own way. Everyone had put in their time, and they had created something special, and, no one can say that Grant is Infinity Blade's #1 fan. It's just not possible, because there are so many people that this means something to, that it's a part of their story just as much, if not more, than it is mine. And so I felt unworthy of it, truly, and was very shocked and honored when I learned that I'd been chosen. And so, I think I'm kind of winding through your question here, and I think it was primarily about the process of submitting something, right? So that's kind of how I arrived at that place.
Yeah, no, that segues nicely into what I was going to ask about next, and that was, I guess, kind of the standout prize for a Superfan contest, and that was visiting Chair in Salt Lake City, and of course Salt Lake Comic-Con that was that year. I'm sure there's a lot to kind of recall about that, but what's a standout memory from that? What do you remember?
Oh man, I'll mention two things, I suppose. Three. One thing I'll mention that was really cool when I visited Chair was holding the Infinity Blade, because that was the second trip. Scratch that. I did go back a second time because I was passing through there on a vacation, a drive that I was taking, and so this is after they'd created the actual Infinity Blade, and so I got to hold that, and that was really cool. But I guess I'm mixing together my occasions, and that was a different occasion. So the other standout things for me when I visited the first time, I would say was really how cool the people there were and how passionate they were about the project. It was great just sitting down with Donald and Jeremy and talking about the lore. And harkening back to my early days on the forum and my initial interest in the game, they had put so much thought into what they wanted this story to be, so much that was even just undisclosed at that time, and might still even be. And it was just really cool to kind of understand their vision for everything and really learn how this was like a cohesive universe that they'd put together. And it's an art form in a way, right? They've got this story that they've imagined in their minds, and they're trying to find ways to this game to let us experience that narrative. And so just kind of learning the vision behind that and the story behind that, and getting to talk to the people that were most passionate about it in the world was an incredible experience. I would say seeing behind the scenes how the game is created was also a really neat experience. I got to kind of see the unlocked version of their Unreal Engine development environment. And so you kind of see how all the possible objects that could be in a room, for example, are just sort of floating there, all the possible, those blue rings that you can click on to say, hey, I want to go here or there. It's like everything is just present. And so it's kind of cool to see them being able to rotate around an environment and see all the things that were present in there and see behind the scenes, both on screen and in person, because they also had me do that motion capture suit, and that was a standout memory. And man, looking back on it, it felt really goofy, and probably for the footage and pictures that were released, it probably looks pretty goofy. But man, I had such a great time doing that. That was a really memorable experience.
Yeah, I know. I often look back on the Infinity Blade Lore Explored series of videos. There being 3, because there's just a wealth of information in those videos. I need to transcribe those so I can kind of search through those, because there is so much, and I'm constantly referring back to them. So yeah, we appreciate you picking their brains about those very important questions, because you did indeed really reveal a lot of information for us. On the subject of the mocap video, it's a video I know that I love. It's at some point we need to get around to extracting the motion capture data for the goofy dance you did at the end, because I've seen that incorporated into some memes, and I know it'd be fun to take that and throw it on some other models and kind of turn that into a mainstay of Infinity Blade memes.
Yeah, that's funny. It was a good memory, and man, when they had me walk like Isa, that was different. Something I can honestly say I'd never attempted to do before, and I'm not sure if it didn't look good or if it looked a little too good. Probably a little bit somewhere in the middle there. But yeah, that was really fun. And I was just going to comment briefly on when it came to sitting down with Donald and Jeremy and asking all those questions. For anybody that wasn't around the forums at that point in time, those questions were community questions. And even though I kind of had like sprinkled in the salt of the things that I really cared about and wanted answers to, I mean, the answers and the questions there really resembled the passion of the community, because like 90 to 95% of those were things that we actually created a community thread at that point in time, where it was like, what do you want Grant to ask when he's visiting Chair? And so people would just like drop their suggestions in there, and I made a massive list and kind of had the opportunity to sort of prioritize what I thought I would ask or not ask. And so everything that came out in that was a huge product of the community and all the things that they cared to hear about.
Yeah, no doubt the community has given us quite a bit of good lore information, from that video series to the September 2014 AMA, the Epic Games Community Podcast. So yeah, can't understate the value of the community, and heck, all that they've done, to be honest.
Oh yeah, and great game ideas that came out of that too, right? Infinity Blade Piles of People, I believe.
Infinity Blade Piles of People. That's true. That is. I keep forgetting about that. That's a good one. I don't know what the order of everything was, but as part of your visit to Salt Lake City was also Salt Lake Comic Con 2014, if I recall correctly, and that was the second year that was happening. Maybe even the first that Chair attended, though. Do you recall anything about how that went?
Yeah, I had never been to a Comic Con before. That was actually my first, so that was really cool in and of itself. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time exploring around. I was just kind of hanging around the Chair crew, and that was kind of neat. I sort of felt like I was part of their team in that. They really brought me alongside them. I had a Chair shirt that I wore to kind of match what they were doing, and it was really neat being able to participate in that and sort of be on the other side of things. I always thought how neat it would be to sort of be part of a group like that, where you're on the backside of the table, so to speak. So it was a neat experience being able to do that and participate in that way.
Yeah, there's a couple of videos of that time at Salt Lake Comic Con, and I totally get what you're saying. It looks like a really, really fun group. I've got those awesome posters there too. Really wish I'd been able to attend to get one of those, because I don't know if you know, but Infinity Blade merchandise is just super, super rare at this point.
Yeah, I have an eBay subscription to anytime Infinity Blade stuff pops up, it'll send me an email and get some weird stuff. I get some interesting trading cards that pop up that have nothing to do with Infinity Blade, but on occasion you'll see like one of the books, printed copy, of course, of the books, or a T-shirt, a signed T-shirt, and man, it is like through the roof expensive and not that common at all. So definitely honored to have been the recipient of some of those things. Oh, I was just gonna say, one thing I never got my hands on is one of those what do they call them when you could 3D print the statues? There was a name for it.
Yeah, just the Infinity Blade collectibles.
Yeah, the collectibles. I can't remember was it Shaper? No.
Sandboxer.
Sandboxer, thank you. Yeah, Sandboxer. I really should have pulled the trigger on that at the time. I was in college, so I didn't have like a whole lot of money to, but I have deep regrets about that. And apparently people are like on fire about their collectibles, and they have those little figurines. I think I posted, I can't remember if it was in the Discord or in the Reddit, fairly recently. It was like in the last 2 years, saying, hey, if anybody wants to part with theirs, I'd be willing to purchase it. And people like borderline take offense to even the question. They're like, I would never part with my figurine. And I completely understand it, because you just can't get those. So that is one of those commodities that I really missed out on and do not have, but would like to.
Yeah, and I also failed to pull the trigger on that. I'm lucky enough to have acquired one secondhand in the last couple of years. It's a smaller one, but I really wish I had gotten a customized Issa or Cyrus with the armor set that I was fond of playing with.
Which one did you get?
It was on eBay maybe a year or two ago, and it was the small version of the Infinity Blade collectible figure itself. So it's the one where it's like stuck in the ground leaning against a tree.
Yes, nice. That probably would have been my preferred one.
For $50 though, they were not cheap.
No. Did you ever get the keychain from Fortnite?
Keychain? Yes, I actually got that right here on my desk.
How about that? Yep, I got one of those too.
Unofficial, but very cool all the same. What else do you have in your Infinity Blade collection, if there's much of one to speak of?
Oh, goodness. So let me see. I've got a few T-shirts. So I've got that one that everybody's seen where you have like the original Infinity Blade character on there. Like kind of looks like Archerin. I don't know if it's actually Archerin, but there's that one. It's sort of a gray color. I've got a chair shirt. I've got I can't remember if they had one that was like an Infinity Blade Minecraft looking one. It was sort of a navy blue.
No, really? Is it the pixel art one?
The pixel art one. It looked like Minecraft. So it was like the little Infinity Blade in the center, but it was sort of like a pixel art.
Yeah, I need to have you send me a picture of that one, because I wasn't sure if that was actually real, if that was a fever dream, because I have seen exactly one other like post about that shirt, not from you, but like just on a Facebook post from back in like 2011 or something. So I wasn't sure if that was a widespread thing, but yeah, you've got a rare one right there for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a real thing. There were actually a lot of those when I visited the studio. I think they must have just printed them, because I remember seeing they had like literal like boxes full of that specific shirt. So I think that was kind of a new one at the time. And come to think of it, I don't think I've seen that other places either. But yeah, some of the people, maybe it's not actually supposed to be Minecraft. It just kind of looked like that to me at the time, the way it was made. And I think there are quite a few people there that were also really into Minecraft amongst the developers. So that might have contributed to why they designed one like that. I think I have a couple signed posters, the original book, and I want to say that's it. Oh, and I do not think I have an IB Superfan shirt, surprisingly. They didn't actually send those to us, but some people later on received those. So that's another one that I do not have, I don't think.
Is that the Players Pantheon shirt?
Players Pantheon.
Okay.
My bad. Yes. I do not have a Players Pantheon shirt.
I saw one of those go up on eBay a couple of years ago, surprisingly.
That is very surprising because I don't think very many people had that. That's like a really limited run, as far as I know.
Well, it sounds like you have a sizable collection yourself. You should put that all together and photograph it, make your own collection update, kind of like I do.
Yeah, I should.
No, that's very cool. So, of course, you were still involved with the community on the forums. I recall you like keeping updated with the UTL, with the Aegis tournaments and all that. But, of course, with the final content update in 2015, Kingdom Come, things started to wind down. So what do you recall about, I guess, the aftermath of the games, the wind down, and just those final years of the community?
I remember distinctly when the forum was hacked that first time around, and there was just kind of a way that we were accustomed to everything being, as far as signatures and having our own designs on the avatars and just the different forum banners and that kind of thing. And so when it was hacked the first time around, it just kind of felt like our little way of life there was disrupted, which might sound kind of silly, but it's just the human nature of comfort. And, every time you go back to the same table, you're going to want to sit in the same seat and that kind of thing. So just being displaced and separated from the community for a period of time, but then also returning and having things be different was really strange for all of us, I think. And I think it was around that time that we had not a mass exodus, but a lot of people just kind of really slowed down their involvement in the forum. It didn't feel quite the same, if that makes it all sense. And so once Infinity Blade 3 updates stopped being released, once the forum started slowing down and we actually received word that it was going to finally be shut down, it just got quiet. People moved on with their lives, and it's sort of like we discussed before, between each of the games 1 and 2, and more so than that, 2 and 3, those departures that people would take from the forum to sort of attend to their personal lives got longer and longer and longer, and just the community, as much as it could, sort of dried up, which was really a shame. And I can't separate myself from that because I was also busy and also finding fewer reasons to attend the forum during that period of time. So definitely a sad thing. It's something that you never think is really going to go away. On the internet, with the cheapness of storage space, there's not a whole lot of reason to shut things down completely. So it came as a bit of a surprise, and definitely sad when it did occur. And to be honest, in the years that followed the shutdown of the forum, I wasn't super aware of an active community existing until I came upon Reddit, and then someone told me via Reddit that there was a Discord available. So logging into the Discord for the first time, maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was, and seeing the thousands of people that were part of that community was extremely surprising and pleasing. That the next generation of players sort of took up the mantle there and continued in their passion, started their own clubs, still discuss lore, and so forth. And so seeing that was a really, really special thing.
I know the feeling. I've had a somewhat similar experience. I was in the community and on the forums at the time of the first hacking, and I get what you mean with the change in how things were, at least the status quo, how things we were used to. I know I lost my signature in the hack, something that I hadn't had for very long, but had tried to build up with whatever I could. So that was kind of an odd pickup to the community, and then along comes the second hack, and things kind of just fell apart at that point. And even when they announced Spy Jinx and started up new forums for that, and so I signed up for those anew. The fact that nothing really came down the pipeline as far as communication after that definitely kind of put the nail in the coffin. And I know I definitely fell away from the community for a while and to discover the Reddit, the Discord, and the community that existed there.
Did you find those pretty shortly after the forum shut down, or did it take you a little while?
Definitely took me a while. I don't know why I didn't really look for anything sooner, but I must have moved away from Infinity Blade or maybe iOS gaming in general, and so probably started playing on console, and so it was some years, maybe 3 years ago from now, that I maybe happened upon the subreddit in the Discord server by chance and joined, but didn't really say anything. And it was only like the time I started this YouTube channel that I decided to actually get involved and start talking.
This is more just for you, but do you remember when they transitioned, and I think it was due to the first hack, they transitioned from like a dark theme on the forum, and it was kind of like old looking, more like Gears of War style, to that new sort of bright light one, and had Cyrus in the corner, and it seemed like it went from like more of a narrow format to like a wide format, and a lot of things got really jacked up with that. Like I think we all lost our post counts, we lost the custom avatars, we lost some important threads. It was either that or like the formatting for the threads, because we did like a lot of coding behind the scenes on the way that those posts were structured. And so going through and trying to reformat that and reinsert pictures, and I think tables wouldn't work inside of signatures anymore. And, again, more just between the two of us, but I don't know if my memory is serving me correctly on all that, but I just remember it feeling not quite as like homey and the same as before. And it felt like a lot of the things that we'd worked really hard towards just got, erased in the blink of an eye. Do you remember it the same way?
That does sound familiar. I know the forum went through a couple of cosmetic changes from when it was just like Unreal Tournament to Gears of War and then Infinity Blade and all that. And eventually when Spyjinx came along, they redid the forums entirely, and they were a even brighter, even more modern layout with bright blue, the colors of Spyjinx and all that. So yeah, no, that definitely does sound very familiar. Well, with that kind of brings us to the end of the then history of Infinity Blade. Is there anything you wanted to say about what you've been up to since then? I know time is valuable, so I won't keep you for too much longer, but if not, is there just a favorite memory from all this time that you'd, leave us with?
Sure, absolutely. I'll just say my favorite memory through all that time, even though I enjoyed the game so much and playing it and still do, I think my favorite memory through all that time was just taking part in the community, developing the relationships there, and really feeling like you were a part of something bigger than yourself. My wife said something interesting recently about video games and how they, if you're not doing it right when it comes to video games, they tend to isolate you. You're focused on, beating that level or winning that game, getting that achievement, whatever it may be, leveling up. And it becomes something that isolates rather than brings together. And that's not always the case. But I'm really glad that when it came to Infinity Blade, that certainly wasn't my experience. And I think it was also not many other people's experience as well, is that through that game we found not just something that was great gameplay-wise, but we found a fantastic group of people. And having the pleasure and honor of interfacing with them on a regular basis was something I wouldn't trade.
Yeah, and that spirit of the community has definitely persisted through to today, because even though I may have my old iPod and I could technically sit down and play the games at any point, that's not the side of Infinity Blade that really gets me. It's it's the story, and that brings me to those places like the subreddit and the Discord to talk about the story and really engage with the community. So I totally get that's where it's kind of what brings you back. I'll wake up in the morning and heck, at any point during the day, is check to see what new messages there are, what new conversations are going on.
I love it. Yeah. And I love that you're still so engaged with it, and so many people are. And I have been known to pop in every now and again, but not super publicly, but I do enjoy seeing what people are up to there, and pleasing to see everybody's still so active and interested.
yeah, well, there's still indirectly things going on with the community, whether that be with Epic and whatnot. So there's always something to talk about. So we appreciate you checking in on us, and appreciate you coming on the program to talk to me about your time with the community, time with Infinity Blade, and this thing that is so close to many of our hearts.
Thank you so much, Archivist, for having me on, and it's a great pleasure talking with you today.
Yeah, thank you again, Grant, and I'll talk to you when I talk to you again, and maybe we'll have you on again in the future. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I'd love that.
I want to convey my thanks again to Grant for being on the podcast, and to you for listening to this inaugural episode of the show. If you enjoyed it, please consider following the show on whatever platform you're listening on. Share it with other Infinity Blade fans you may know. And if you need more, you can find me, the Archivist, elsewhere online at the Archivist IB. Keep an eye out for upcoming content, more episodes of the show, and let me know what you thought if there's a comment section below. I've been the Archivist. I'll see you mortals next time. Hell take us.